One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes. I'm Trey Reeves, joined tonight by Garrett Turney. Mitch is recovering from a fun little trip to Arizona that we got to hear a lot about in the text thread this weekend. A little jealous of the weather and the pictures that he was sending, but
not a little jealous, very jealous.
The vibes were very high in the Grand Canyon State. I think it's the Grand Canyon State. Somebody from Arizona can correct me. They are one of the few states that is not currently part of the ACC, Garrett. They kind of got skipped over on the flight between Texas and California. But we are talking about many other states and the schools that are within them in the Atlantic Coast Conference, the All Coast Conference. It just means less if you're into some of the people on Twitter that cover this conference. Garrett, we're going to talk about the ACC tonight, just kind of a year in review, similar to what we've done with the Big Ten and SEC already, just kind of breaking the teams up into tiers, talking about what happened in the year that was, and taking a very way too early look forward into 2025. Happy to have you alongside, my friend. How you doing?
Dude, fantastic weekend for us. It's been great up here. Not as great as Mitch, though. I want to spend one more second just talking. You said recovering from a trip. I'm like, it must be brutal to recover from beautiful Arizona on the golf course, sipping cocktails and all that stuff. Man, he was having a great weekend. So if you want the details, go head over to our Twitter. He was talking a little bit of mess over there, and I can't blame him, man. It looked great. And, there's a part of me that's sitting there like, hey, come on. Why are you going to rub that in our face? It's we're living in Texas. It's not quite as, sunny and gorgeous as it is over there. We got, rain falling as I'm currently speaking and, falling outside of my window. And it's just, it's one of those where I'm like, come on, Mitch, you gonna rub this in our face? He's taking pictures from the golf course. Sure, that's cool. And I'm like, thanks, Mitch. And all joking aside, it's an awesome trip for them. They definitely needed that. And I'm pumped that he gets to do that. So hope he finishes recovering from that one. And, we'll talk a little ACC ball while he's not here. When Mitch is away, the boys get to play. So let's have a pod.
Let's get weird as we talk about a very weird conference in the year of our Lord 2025.
Yes.
We'll start at the top, Gary. Let's start with the Clemson Tigers, still the kings of the ACC, the much maligned Clemson Tigers throughout the season. Everybody all year long was talking about how Dabo was not using the transfer portal, not adapting to modern college football. And lo and behold, we get to the first week of December, and who's the champions of the ACC? The Clemson Tigers. And yet, I still feel like this was kind of a baseline season, or maybe should be considered a baseline season for how Clemson played out. Of course, they lost 3 games in the regular season. They lost to South Carolina, still found their way to Charlotte to win the ACC championship. But it's really hard to appreciate a season like that when you think about it in the context of just the generational run that they were on.
Yeah, and Clemson, can we just take a second and take a big step back and just clap our hands for the Clemson Tigers for a second? Because what they've been doing for the last, I don't know how long, of college football has been fantastic. I pulled up some numbers. Since 2011, they have failed to reach the 10-win mark only once. They've had 10 or more every single season, a couple of national championships in there, obviously. And they really haven't done it being a massive portal player in recent years. Yeah, they had the 9-4 season in 2023. I'm not going to give them any crap for that. 9-4 is still a plenty good year. But that's, again, you're breaking in a young quarterback, and that young quarterback isn't quite so young anymore. He looks pretty dang good. Had a fantastic season this last year. I'm going to give my my brownie points to Cade Klubnik as well. pulling up his statistics from this last year. Cade Klubnik going for 3,639 yards and 36 touchdowns. Take a bow. Congratulations, Cade Klubnik. You figured it out this year. For a guy that a lot of people were really questioning and kind of, maybe doubting going into the year, he looked really, really dang good. And the thing that I thought about Clemson, right, when we were breaking this down, I was like, do you remember Clemsoning? Like, do you remember that as a term?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah, that was the biggest thing for
Yeah,
my early college football watching years.
it was just a meme, like, oh, Clemson, they blow it on the big stage, they never get it done. And, like, Clemsoning hasn't been a thing for so long. There's students in high school that don't know what Clemsoning means because it just hasn't been a thing. So, like, shout out to Dabo Sweeney. Give him all of his brownie points. Give him everything he wants because he's had a fantastic career there, and it's still going. I think a lot of people, myself included, last offseason were pretty skeptical about Clemson's ability to win going forward, despite the fact that, yeah, they've proven they can win, but they just weren't using the portal. They just weren't winning with the portal. They weren't going and utilizing that tool. And it didn't make sense either because why wouldn't you want to transfer to Clemson? If you're one of these, big time players at a smaller school, why would you not want an opportunity to come play for a powerhouse in a conference that really hasn't been all that competitive in recent years? I mean, again, they've got 9 conference championships since 2011. It's Clemson's conference. They're still the Kings. And it's just funny kind of thinking about, like, yeah, this year felt like a baseline for what they should be, expecting and achieving as a team. I'm looking at them this next year. ACC competition still overall not going to be that great. I think a couple of teams that maybe were pretty good last year, maybe taking a little step back. Again, Cade Klubnik, one of the best quarterbacks returning next year. For my money, I'd probably put him top 3. There's their wide receiver trio. They got Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco, and TJ Moore, dynamic playmakers, over 2,200 yards and 21 touchdowns last year. Like, they're the number 1 team in returning production. This is going to be a very good Clemson team next year. And so I might kick it over to you again, but I mean, number one, Trey, how impressed were you with the job they did this last year? And then kind of a part B of that, what do you think it takes for Clemson to finish the job next year, maybe get a championship and make that their 3rd championship in the last decade plus?
I think you got to kind of put 2024 Clemson, you've got to take them out of the context of what Clemson has been for the last decade, right? Because objectively, they had a really good season last year. They had one of the most difficult non-conference schedules in the country. Mm-hmm. They played a playoff team in Georgia, a borderline playoff team in South Carolina, lost both of those games. And obviously those count in the loss column. But other than the what the heck is going on game against Louisville in conference play, they were their usual selves. They had a couple close games. They found a way to win almost all except for the Louisville game and found themselves holding the trophy at the end of the year. So, and might I add that they played the closest first round game of all the teams that went on the road. Mm-hmm. They probably had the toughest draw in the Texas Longhorns, other than maybe Indiana, I guess, who got one of the toughest draws. We'll just say that. Sure. Going to Austin, they were the 12 seed playing the 5 seed, and they played closest in the first round. So obviously the talent is there, but it's really hard to evaluate Clemson because they are leaps and bounds better talent-wise than most of the ACC.
Yep.
And they took care of business, like I said, but it does leave you feeling wanting just a little bit more when you think about it in the context of what Clemson has been under Dabo Sweeney for so long. So I think Cade Klubnik showed that he can be the next in line of the great quarterbacks at Clemson. Clemson's championships have come when they've had generational talent at the quarterback position with Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. I think we're ready to start talking about Cade Klubnik. Not quite in the highest pedestal as obviously Trevor Lawrence was coming in. He was one of the most hyped recruits of all time. Cade Klubnik was a 5-star, but nowhere near the hype that Trevor Lawrence was. So, but Deshaun Watson was a guy that developed over his career, and by the time that he was a senior, was ready to lead them to national championships. So, I'm excited to see what he can do next year. I think they're always going to have a favorable schedule in conference, and the way that this is set up right now, obviously it could change very quickly. We're on playoff change watch every single day, it seems like, but we are in a position where if they can win the ACC, they're going to have a shot to maybe still be a top 4 seed and get a bye and play neutral games only in the playoffs. So they certainly, if you're discounting Clemson just because they lost 3 games in the regular season this year, you're not really paying attention because they are going to be right there in the thick of it next year.
Yeah, and probably even improved because it's not like their defense was as shut down as we expected them to be. It was kind of a ho hum year for them, and I think they got a little bit exposed when they did play Texas. Some of those tackling issues, not being able to get out there and defend the boundary a little bit, but it ultimately it came back to bite them. That's a very good Texas team. I'm just kind of looking around college football right now, saying like a lot of the top teams from last year, I think got worse. And Clemson's one of those few teams that I think got a lot better just because they kept their guys, and I think those guys are just going to keep improving. You mentioned it, but Clemson is a place where players develop, right? They develop at Clemson. In order for them to have been as successful as they've been without the transfers that they've had, they get talent, but they develop their talent. They get their guys in-house. They get their guys that want to commit to their process, and then they take them through that whole thing so that, like, even a guy like Cade Klubnik, who, like I said, was much maligned coming into the season, they kept with him, and they said, okay, you know what, this year wasn't quite what we wanted it to be. Let's try again next year. And they kept with their guy. They didn't just go say, let's go find the next hotshot quarterback in the portal and see if we could plug him in, because that wasn't what they needed to do for their team. That's not what their team called for in that moment. And I think that that's the big thing about Clemson is they do develop their players. They do a really good job of making sure that their players reach the finish line and then bring them up over the top. Another reason I'm super pumped about Clemson next year, I think the schedule gets a lot more manageable. Obviously, no Georgia to start the year. That's going to be a lot better. They do play LSU. That game is at home.
I already can't wait for that game.
Yeah,
That's week 1,
yeah, number
right?
1.
That's week 1.
Yeah, must-see TV, Saturday, August 30th.
We get that and Texas versus Ohio State.
It's going to be immaculate. Just, a fantastic day of college football. It can't come soon enough. Like, we're pumped about it. But then, you got the Troy Trojans. Okay, that's fine. At Georgia Tech. Could be difficult. Georgia Tech's been a little better in years, but they should win that game. Syracuse is on the schedule. I think they're going to take a step back. We're talking about that in a little bit. North Carolina, Boston College, SMU could be tricky. That could be a tricky one in the middle of October. But then you get your bye week. You go Duke, Florida State, at Louisville. Again, could be a little tricky before you get your Furman, followed by at South Carolina and Palmetto. But look, it's a really manageable schedule. If they can finish that with like maybe 10-2 pessimistically, I think, and going in there, go 10-2, go win your conference, they'll be one of those top seeds. They'll have a bye, and they'll be in a great position to go and make a run and hopefully be one of those teams that gets to stand at the end of the season and say, hey, we did it. We won our championship.
Biggest thing for me is they got to be more explosive on offense. I was beating that drum all season long. They didn't have a consistent explosive playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. Their yards per play statistics in a lot of their conference games were, if you took that and extrapolated it out throughout the season, would be very, very low. We're talking triple digits in the year-long ranking. So got to find some more big playmakers on offense. Got to find, and they're doing that work. They are using the transfer portal this year more than they have ever in the past under Tapo Sweeney.
And they have really good receivers, right? They need, I think you're right, they do need a little bit more of that explosivity, and they got to get a little bit more out of the run game. Like, I know that Phil Maffa had a great year. Like, statistically, everything looked good. They didn't really lean on him that much. I'd like to see him lean a little bit more on the run game than they did this last year. There were moments where Phil Maffa, I feel like, didn't really affect the game. He certainly had his moments. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Phil Maffa affected the game in a lot of ways, but over the season, 8 touchdowns, 1,100 yards, 216 carries. I'd like to see somebody, maybe combined between a couple of running backs. Let's find a way to get that up to, like, getting your primary guy like a 250, 260, 12 or 1,300 yards. I think that's what it's going to take for a Clemson team to get over the hump, right? A little bit more of that ground and pound, balance the offense, and then, hit those big shots over the top of those talented receivers. For my money, they might have the second best receiver room in the country. It's just got to actually turn it around in terms of explosive plays. I'm looking right here. Air yards per attempt last year for Cade Klubnik, 8.4. That could go up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just the long stretches without getting a big play or two to kind of break the ice. And that's what kept a lot of those games closer than they should have been as well. They were really having to grind out offense, and the Pitt game, the
Florida State,
Florida State
29-13 was
game.
the final on that one. That wasn't a great showing against a really bad Florida State team.
Yeah. And that's because the big plays really help you put those teams away. So that's what I'm looking for the Tigers next year. If you can show me that you are expanding the offense and making strides in that big play category, I'm in on you as a full-on bona fide championship contender. And hey, they get a team in week 1 that likes to give up a big play or two.
They sure do.
So that will be a very good litmus test right off the top. Garrett, let's move on to the other 2 top teams in the league from the past year, the SMU Mustangs and the Miami Hurricanes. I'm going to start this one a little bit differently. I know we're thinking back on the year that was, but using what we saw on the field this year, I'm going to throw you a little curveball question. It's not in the doc, but
all good.
If you had to buy stock in one of these 2 programs over the next 5 years, who are you buying stock in, SMU or Miami?
It's got to be SMU at this point, right? Like, and it kind of goes down to a couple things that I have prepared, but look, SMU has figured out the quarterback position, and balls on Rhett Lashley to go from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings and to make that move. Like that, the Stones to make that move and say, hey, here's our guy that everyone's been hyping up, and there was no reason for Preston Stone to play.
We were all on the Preston Stone.
I think we have a video called like the Stone Age or something like that. Like it's that we were that hyped about Preston Stone and what he was going to do, and it just didn't pan out at the beginning of the season. We saw how bad it looked against BYU with our own eyes, and I mean, Kevin Jennings came in and wasn't always perfect, but looked good as a quarterback and had a really good year. Not such a happy time in Happy Valley, but a really good year otherwise. They know what they want. They got their playmakers. And the big thing for me right now is going to be the money game, right? It's that SMU, I think, over Miami can win the money game, especially with what they're going to be able to pull out of the state of Texas. I think SMU's in a great position as long as Rhett Lashley is at the helm. Like, Rhett Lashley has to be the coach, right? He can't go take another job or, go find a better place to work or something like that. But
they're not going to get outspent for Rhett Lashley either.
They're not going to get outspent for Rhett Lashley, right? But, as long as Rhett Lashley is still leading the program, I think that they'll probably do well. My big concern there is just making sure that they can keep the talent coming in and keep pitching it to guys. They've done really well kind of with the transfer portal, getting some of those Dallas kids coming back home, kids from, maybe Duncanville that are transferring back, kids from South Oak Cliff that are transferring back. They've done a really good job grabbing some of those kids. Maybe not necessarily that good on like more of the statewide, national-wide level at the recruiting and the transfer portal game. Really want to see them take that step forward. But if I have to buy stock, I'm buying it in SMU because I can make you the case for positivity in that program. I don't know that I can make a case for anything positive with Miami. You just had Cam Ward as your quarterback, had a fantastic year, 4,300 yards, 39 total touchdowns through the air. He had a great
year in the Pop-Tarts Bowl.
Yeah, no, one in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And you had him. He looked great. Like we saw there were so many times they deserved to lose a game, and he just kind of said, nope, not on my watch, and he just figured it out. But you're making the transition to Carson Beck. He's good quarterback, played well. Not the same level talent as Cam Ward, I don't think. Doesn't have the same arm talent. Doesn't have the same gunslinger mentality. And they had a great season. They looked really good. But then number 4 Miami walked in to Georgia Tech and got beat. And I don't mean just beat like the other team beat you technically because they got the right fumble at the right time. Like Georgia Tech ran the ball down their throats and did a really good job just kind of dominating them up front, getting overly physical with them. And then they finished with a loss to Syracuse. Yeah, both of those games are on the road, but I don't want to hear it if you got one of the better quarterbacks in the country. And when I look at that and I say, okay, well, you had one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Xavier Estrepo is an awesome receiver. You had lots of talent over the field. What are we doing now? One of my questions I threw in there was, does Mario Cristobal finally have enough talent to win at Miami? That's a joke. He's had the talent. They've had great rosters for several years now. he can't get it done. They can't finish. They're not physical enough. They don't have that grit to kind of, just sink their teeth into their enemy and finish them off. They don't have the killer instinct. They don't have the ability to grit out a gross win when they need it and just run the ball to, kill clock or whatever it is. They can't do it. They just, I don't know what it is, but something about that team, their mindset, their culture, something ain't right. And so when it comes to Miami or SMU, I'll make you a case for SMU that things can go up from here. I don't know how much higher things can get for Miami outside of firing Cristobal and finding somebody who can do the job better.
This was a peak year for Miami. This was a year where it felt like the gates were wide open to get to the college football playoff, to win the ACC for the first time in program history, and to compete for a national championship. We were looking all year long for who was an actual college football playoff contender outside of, the big ones in the SEC, Ohio State and Oregon. And we kept trying to put Miami in that puzzle piece all year long, but it was just close win at Cal, miracle win against, I think it was Virginia Tech, the game where there was the
catch that was controversial. Yeah.
Back-to-back weeks where those two games happened. The defense falls apart a couple times throughout the year, right? For a while, they were holding on, and they were doing what Clemson did for so many years, right?
Yeah.
Where they're winning a bunch of close games. It looks like they're just going to find their way to Charlotte, and then they just fall apart in the month of November and inexplicably fall apart in the month of November. But this was a year where Florida was down. Florida State was down.
Yep.
They beat both of those teams, of course, but Clemson did not have a season that was up to the standard that Clemson has had over the last decade. And there wasn't really another team. Louisville was the next best team in the ACC, right? So it was all right there.
They were in a close game with Louisville too.
It was a really fun back and forth shootout.
And you got to think Duke had a great season too. They were right there with Duke for a while. We thought Duke was going to win that game for a good chunk of that, first half or whatever it was.
Yeah, and just not really able to separate themselves from most of the teams that were on their schedule in a year that they really needed to show that they could be a title contender. To come up short in a 12-team playoff in a year like this is really disappointing for Miami. On the other side of the coin, I don't think enough people are talking nationally about what Rhett Lashley did at SMU to come into a power conference and go undefeated in conference play. Have your only blemishes come in a weird game with a starter that you thought you were locked in with at quarterback against BYU. A championship game against Clemson when they really needed to win to get in, and you were kind of in a situation. It went down to the wire. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong to start that game, and you still lose at the gun on a long field goal. And we don't have to talk about what happened in Happy Valley, but not enough people nationally are talking about the job that Rhett Lashley did. How many times, Garrett, have we seen a team try to transition from a G5 conference to a power conference, and it just goes horribly wrong for the first couple of years? I'm thinking about how great, since Cincinnati was coming off a playoff run in a 4-team playoff. And what have they done in the Big 12? UCF has struggled to get to bowl games after going undefeated in the American a few years running. TCU really struggled when they made that jump, right? Utah was kind of the gold standard up to this point because they were able to win 8 games or so a couple of times early on in their Pac-12 tender. So not enough people are talking about the job that Rhett Lashley did. You mentioned it off the top, to make that quarterback transition, to see that, hey, we came into it with this offseason with a plan, and 3 games into the year, we can see that plan is not going to work. To have the stones to make that move just really gave me a lot of confidence in him moving forward and his ability to direct that program.
Yeah, because he wants to do the best thing for the team and the program, and he doesn't want to just sit there and say, no, we promised this guy or we win it with the whole team. It took.
He's a guy that waited his turn. Yeah. He could have transferred out after the first couple of years. And
totally.
To look at that kid and still be able to make that move,
Mm-hmm.
He's the adult in the room making
Yeah.
the decisions, and that gives me, if you're an SMU fan, you should have a lot of confidence in Rhett Lashley
Yeah.
going forward.
And his ability to take the accountability after that BYU loss, that we were there covering it. Mitch was in the conference, and he was sitting there on their side. We went to the BYU winning side, but for Mitch to sit in there and talk about, like, yeah, he took some accountability. It was pretty tough. The media was pretty tough on him, but to go to Kevin Jennings to make him your quarterback now, big deal. And I think you can't even talk about how big of a deal that was for their team. They don't make the playoff without it. I don't think that where their team was last year and some of the plays that I saw Kevin Jennings make last year, I don't think Preston Stone makes some of those plays, and I don't think he keeps them in some of those close games where they were able to come out on top. Also, one more quick point on Miami, and I'm not trying to keep dogging on them, but like, you had Cam Ward, you had Xavier Restrepo. I forgot to mention you had Damian Martinez, and one of the better running backs in the portal last year. You had everything that you wanted, anything you could have possibly asked for, and it just fell apart. Like it again, 10-3 is a fine season. A lot of college football programs would love to go 10-3 in a season. You had the number one scoring offense, and we've had this conversation before, like, how much better can it get versus how much worse can it get? Like Miami fans, truly, I'm not trying to hate on your team, but like, where does the offense get better now with Carson Beck? Like, why should I expect more from this Miami team coming up than I had last year, when you had like one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best running backs in the country, one of the best receivers in the country, like a team that overall just like clicked really well? Why should I believe that somehow this year you're also going to average 43 points a game and be the first team or number one offense in scoring, and then somehow it's going to turn into something better than 10-3? Like, this is what you did. And again, that's fine. You can be a good program. You're allowed to go 10-3 every single year and not win championships. Go ask Ole Miss how that feels. Like, that's a thing that's real. Like, it's a thing to be one of those teams that's right on the doorway but can't get it done. A lot of teams are there. Miami, if you want to be there, that's fine. But like, that's why I'm saying, if you have to make me buy stock right now in either Miami or SMU, like, I got to go SMU because they made the playoff. They're on the way up. The roster should only get better. The talent level overall should only get better. Like, SMU's on the rise. I believe in what their coaching is doing. I don't believe in Mario Cristobal and what Miami's doing.
All right, quick segment here on this next one, Gary. We got one team to talk about. It's our favorite question. Is Syracuse good? The answer to that question was a resounding yes.
Oh, yeah.
Here, because they had Kyle McCord behind center, and they had LaQuinn Allen running for over 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. Fun year. And I think I pointed out Syracuse and I think all three of us did, pointed out Syracuse, looking at their schedule, looking at Kyle McCord, having a chance to just have a lot of pressure taken off of his shoulders by moving from Columbus to Syracuse. And that paid off in spades. I really felt great for Kyle McCord, watching him just have fun, ball out in a program that, let's face it, is always going to have lower expectations than in Ohio State. But
sure,
he had a fantastic season. He looked like he was loving the game of football again, when it felt like he probably wasn't at the end of his tenure at Ohio State. And I think that was a good move for all parties involved there. But like I mentioned, they did have a pretty lax schedule this year. They had some interesting road trips. I think they went out to UNLV for a non-conference game. Had avoided a lot of the big boys. Knocked off a big boy in Miami to end the regular season and go 9-3, but definitely had a lighter schedule, and that's kind of why we were circling them in the offseason. Do you think that they have staying power in this new ACC, or are they going to kind of fall off a little bit, losing a guy like Kyle McCord?
I really want to hope so, but man, like, Kyle McCord, the Kyle McCord and Ohio State saga from this year is going to be one of the weirdest cases of everybody wins, because Kyle McCord moves on, leads the nation in passing yards, absolutely balls out. Like, I think set the Syracuse record, said like ACC record, maybe. I can't remember what the record was exactly, but I remember there in the bowl game, they talked about some record that he broke that was like an all-timer type of thing. 34 touchdowns. Kyle McCord clearly benefited from being not at Ohio State. And also, Ohio State clearly benefited from not having Kyle McCord as their quarterback. They won the whole thing. So it's a weird case that I'd like to go back and maybe look at and see, has there ever been a case where everybody won as much as Ohio State and Kyle McCord, where everyone gets to look back at the end of the season and say, you know what? I think we're all happy about the way this played out. It's very rare. But in terms of staying power, the defense definitely left a lot to be desired. 96th in scoring defense this last year. Really need to find some ways to clean that up. They definitely have good members of the staff that can help with that, but got to find a way to clean that up on that side. And then I want to believe that they're going to have another quarterback like that. Honestly, haven't checked to see if they have a guy in the portal like that. I didn't check their portal stats before looking at this, but I don't know that they're necessarily going to have the staying power, specifically because I'm looking at their schedule. Their schedule trades in for a pretty rough one. To kind of read some of this out for this next season, they start the year against Tennessee and Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz. That's going to be a tough one. It's going to be tough to go up against Tennessee. They do play at Clemson. They do play at SMU. They do play at Miami. Oh, yeah, and they also play at Notre Dame. It's going to be tough. Like, if they play up to their ceiling this year and still play really good football, they could still lose 5 games. And it sucks because I really want to see this Syracuse program have staying power. And we answered the question. I kind of threw it in the doc as a joke, the whole, like, is Syracuse good? Like, I can't believe we're asking this question again after the season they just had. But, like, that was an awesome year. It was a fantastic year for Syracuse, and I love what they were able to do. I want to see them repeat it. I would love it if Syracuse is able to have some form of power up there. I love what Coach Brown's doing. I think it's great. But, like, we got to find a way to get the talent on the team. We got to find a way to capitalize on this momentum, steal a couple wins this year, right? Go beat Tennessee to open the season, shock the world. Go beat Notre Dame at the end of the year or something like that. Just a weird fluky game in the cold or something. And you can maybe steal some of that momentum, but I want to see it happen, right? I think that they need to turn things around. They need things to get a lot better. And they're going to need to replace a lot of production between Kyle McCord. And by the way, yeah, LaQuint Allen ran for 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. That's not nothing. A lot of people like to run for 1,000 yards and 16 touchdowns. So, yeah, not 100% sure that it's this year for Syracuse. Might be a little bit of a step backwards in terms of the record, but I do think the program can keep growing.
They did get Ricky Collins in the portal. He was a 4-star recruit, and I think the class of 2023 that committed to LSU originally and now is going up to Syracuse. Okay. So not a big splash name, but guy that had some pedigree out of high school. And, we'll see how.
Not Garrett Schrader, so I'm happy about that.
That's right. He's not a retread, that's for sure. Yeah. Garrett, let's talk about some teams with some, it seems like, bright futures. We'll stay in the positive light here for a little bit longer before maybe getting a little negative to end the show. 4-pack of teams here for you. The Duke Blue Devils, Louisville Cardinals, Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and Boston College Eagles all had very positive seasons this year. Was there one of those 4 teams that impressed you the most and you feel like has a brighter future because of the season that they had in 24?
That almost for me is kind of 2 different answers to that. The team that impressed me the most this last year was actually probably the Duke Blue Devils. I did not expect the Duke Blue Devils to do much of anything this year. I think when they made when Mike Elko left, right, and he leaves for A&M, he had a couple of really good seasons at Duke. I think a lot of us probably condemned Duke to just go back to the cellar and say, all right, Duke, well, you had a couple of years. There you go. Congratulations. And they didn't necessarily do anything amazing, but they had a pretty good season. They go 9-4. They pick up some good wins. Malik Murphy looked pretty good. And Manny Diaz overall pulls in a pretty good year in year one. And I think a lot better than a lot of us expected them to pull in that year one. Obviously, they beat Northwestern at the beginning of the season. That was a big one. Beat North Carolina. Beat Florida State, but then again, who didn't last year? And, in the season with a couple of wins against Virginia Tech and Wake Forest, get smoked in your bowl game. Sorry about it. Ole Miss will do that to you. But, I was really impressed with Duke and what they're able to accomplish this year. Anytime you're going to win 9 games in a season, I'm going to be impressed with you. I'm going to take the overall record above everything else. But as we've talked about on the podcast a couple of times, and even I think very recently, I'm most excited about where Georgia Tech is going. I think Georgia Tech has a really bright future ahead of them. I love the program. I love the confidence. I love the culture going on with Brent Key at Georgia Tech. What he's been able to accomplish there has been, I think, nothing short of incredible. He cares about it, right? His team is his team. Like, he played offensive line at Georgia Tech. He cares about the program itself. He wants to be gritty. They ran the football extremely well this last year. Haynes King and Jamal Hayes basically running into brick walls just to gladiator themselves through. Almost pulled off the upset at Georgia. It's exciting. And I think this year, we talked about it on the last podcast, but I think this year is going to be a big step in the right direction for Georgia Tech, where you're finally going to see some of that moving the right way because the schedule plays a lot better. You start the year at Colorado, but then, you play Clemson at home. Not a whole lot going on up until, you could say like at Duke could be tricky if they're still good. Syracuse, maybe if they're still good, but we don't really know what to expect out of either of those teams. Depends on what you think about Boston College as well. Then you finish the season against Georgia at home. You almost got them. This last year. You're still going to have Haynes King. You're still going to have Jamal Hayes. They're not going to have Carson Beck. They're not going to have some of those guys they had relied on. So if you wanted to make the case that they win that game, I'm not upset about that. I'm not upset about that. In Atlanta, I'm not upset about them winning that game as a prediction. So do I want to put my money on that? No, not right now. But I don't hate that prediction. I'm very optimistic on Georgia Tech and where they're going as a program.
How about Jeff Brom and the Louisville Cardinals? Because I think that they are quietly building one of the best recruiting mechanisms in the ACC and quietly one of the better ones given the resources that they supposedly have in the country. When you talk about just bang for your buck, they are living and dying by transfer quarterbacks the last couple of years, and it looks like they're going to continue to do that next year, picking up Miller Moss in the portal. But hey, it's worked for them thus far. The problem, of course, we'll talk about the Florida State Seminoles in just a second. Problem is when you're living and dying by these one-year rental guys, if you miss, you are going to just have an absolute crater of a season. But I really like what Jeff Brom is doing at Louisville. He's building a consistent winner, and I think eventually he's going to break through to that next step. I don't know if it's 2025, but if you keep getting 8, 9, eventually 10 wins, eventually you're going to knock down the door to an ACC championship, a conference championship, and find yourself in the playoffs. So excited to see what he can keep building there.
Well, and I think the big point there is you have to be able to hit on the quarterbacks, but this might be the best quarterback they've had so far. I don't think there's anything that's a stretch about saying that Miller Moss is maybe the better quarterback they've had so far. Tyler Shuck was plenty good. What was it, Plummer the year before that? Jack Plummer.
Yep.
And neither of those guys are bad quarterbacks. They both played extremely well at Louisville. I think both of them passed for 3,000 yards, but Miller Moss is, I think, better. Like, talent-wise, I think he's just better than both guys, and I think that he's going to come in there, definitely going to be a little bit stable. I know that, Shuck sometimes had his injury issues. I don't know how his season was last year, but a little bit banged up at times.
He actually stayed healthy this year, and that was the reason that...
Which is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. But I think Miller Moss, man, he's talented. The guy's got what it is. I think he's going to go out there and make a really big impact on Louisville this year. I think can maybe take that offense one step higher. We've talked a couple times about, well, what can you expect of this to get any better? Louisville, the program is good. The talent hasn't always been there. I think this is the better. Again, I think this is a better quarterback they've had. So whereas for a team like Miami, where we're talking about the quarterback position talent-wise falling off, even from Cam Ward to Carson Beck, that is a drop-off. I think this is just one more step in the right direction in terms of transfer portal hits in terms of the quarterback position. So shout out Louisville. If you can get your defense together a little bit more, you might be in play for a little bit of an elite season.
All right, let's get a little, well, maybe potentially negative. You can find some positive spots here, I'm sure. But we have what direction are we going as the next tier here? And it's 5 teams. Florida State, Pitt, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and NC State. Garrett, I'm just going to give the 30,000-foot view here before we jump in. Florida State was obviously an abject train wreck that none of us can look away from this year. DJU experiment failed miserably. You live by the portal, you die by the portal. They scored 15.4 points per game on offense this year. That is good for 131st best in the country. North Carolina had an abysmal defense this year. Just Mac Brown, I don't know why he decided that defense was optional in his second tenure in North Carolina, but that was just something we could come to set our watch by with the Tar Heels under Mac. Pretty good offense this year. Obviously, dealt with a lot of adversity, losing Max Johnson not 3 quarters of the season, 3 physical 15-minute quarters into the season. And they fought their way to a bowl game. And then they decided that they wanted to get younger at head coach by going from a 73-year-old to a 72-year-old.
Because if Mac Brown didn't have enough motivation to coach, why on earth would Bill Belichick?
And let's hire a guy that literally puts an out in his contract for June of this year. That seems like a great plan. We can, if you disagree, we can talk about that in a second. Pitt, one of the best starts in all of college football, one of the most fun starts to follow in all of college football. They start 7-0, they get to number 18 in the polls, and then they lose 6 straight. Also, side note, if you thought basketball was going to be better for Pitt fans, they started 12-2 and then went 4-11 over their next 15. So, not a fun sports year for the Pitt Panthers so far. Virginia Tech and NC State were both really sexy picks to be dark horse candidates and make it to Charlotte this year and maybe even make it to the playoff, largely based on their schedules. And for NC State specifically, we were kind of saying, if not now, when? For the Wolfpack, looking at how their schedule set up and the talent that they had. Grayson McCall coming in, obviously injuries derailed McCall's final season of college eligibility, but a couple of teams that were dark horse picks to win the conference and both barely did enough to make a bowl game this year. So that's a lot of teams, 5 right there. I guess start wherever you'd like, Garrett. Let's talk about if we feel like these teams are going to bounce back in 25 or if they're just going to continue on a downward trajectory.
Remind me if you can, because I want to make sure I have this right. Who is Florida State's quarterback going to be this year? I think it's Frank Castellanos, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they bring him down? I don't know if that's the upgrade to DJU. Look, Castellanos outplayed DJU at Florida State. Like, that happened in front of Florida State's fans. But I don't know that if you're trying to turn a program around like Florida State needs to, I don't know that Castellanos is the guy to do it. Not trying to take shots at him specifically, but when you're talking about a team like Florida State, who was on the cusp of making the playoff, on the cusp of championship contention, quarterback gets hurt and then they don't make the playoff. Again, I disagree with the decision. They should have made the playoff. They deserved it. But didn't make it, get smoked by Georgia in your bowl game, and since then you go 2-10 with just nothing to show for it. Again, you score 15 points a game in there. You lose to just about everybody. I mean, I remember first week of the season, Georgia Tech pulling off the win over Florida State across the pond. That was a huge deal. We were all like, oh my gosh, they actually pulled off the upset. They defeated the juggernaut that is Florida State. And then we just kind of forgot about that because
what would the line of that game, if they played that game on the last week of the season, the line would have been like Georgia Tech minus 13.5.
Yeah, and it probably should have been. And so, look, I mean, you can blame the jet lag for Georgia Tech's underperformance, but you can do whatever you need to justify it. But man, you lose everything. You lose to Memphis at home, and you're losing every game you possibly can. I mean, they
somehow beat Cal. I still
don't know how they beat Cal.
I think the how bad did we get beat graphic was flipped on that one. Like Cal.
Oh yeah, one of those it shouldn't have won. Yeah. And I mean, you get smoked by Florida at the end of the season. Florida didn't have their best year, but they did turn it around. DJU was playing better, so I get it. But man, the rough season for Florida State. And for as many preview episodes that we did last season talking about games that are going to matter because of Florida State being involved in them, and look out for Notre Dame in November, and they got that big matchup with Miami. That'll be College game day for sure. And, they play Clemson, and, they got SMU. That's a big – we talked about so many of these games mattering. None of them did. They just rolled over, and that's the thing I think was most surprising is they played badly, but they didn't like get better. It wasn't like they improved the team and everyone started to play a bunch better all of a sudden. I'm trying to check and see their highest output of points, not counting Charleston Southern because you shouldn't, was 21 points last year. That's atrocious. That's really bad. Every other game was single digits, again, outside of Charleston Southern, which we're not counting. It's really, really rough. And I don't know that I believe that Florida State can turn it around. We've seen what they're capable of, but the meteoric, dissension of this program is going to be something to be studied because this has just been an atrocious Florida State program.
Yeah. If you drew up a dream season for your rival to have, like just a dream bad season for your rival to have, if you're a Florida fan or a Miami fan, you're like, yeah, let me just think about how bad a Florida State season can conceivably be. This was worse.
Yes.
And I don't think that
like, maybe they'll go 5-7 and miss a bowl game. 2-10, never
Wouldn't
close.
it be hilarious if they went 4-8 and lost Memphis somehow? Yeah, no, let's try 2-10. Let's try 2-10. And that just should not happen. And for Mike Norvell to be able to survive that, I know is largely a product of signing an extension and a buyout. And I don't know why schools are still doing this at this point. It rarely works out unless you have a guy that literally has national championship skins on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And even sometimes then it does not work out with national championship skins on the wall. He's on the hottest of hot seats going into 2025, and that's just never a good place to be. We talk about it all the time. The number of coaches that come back from that is just abysmally low. Even if they have a nice little bounce back season, long term, you really struggle. This is a reference that most of our audience probably won't get, but Garrett, he reminds me a lot of Billy Kennedy at Texas A&M as a basketball coach, right? Yeah. Like, obviously, Billy Kennedy, great man, had a lot of extracurriculars. Not that has a bad context, but had a lot of health issues. Had some health issues. Had a lot of things not going his way off the court, but you could just kind of tell early on in his tenure that this wasn't the guy to take over a basketball program that was doing really well. Had one nice, really blip season where everybody said, I told you so. We should believe in him. And then the next year it's right back to the doldrums. And I see that with Mike Norvell. I really have a lot of trouble, a lot of cause for pause to really buy in that he can be the guy to turn this back around and get it back on an upward trajectory. He'll go better than 2-10. So if you want to talk about an upward trajectory, yes, he will win more than 2 games next year. I can almost guarantee that without even looking at their schedule. But program-wise as a whole, I really struggle to buy into him being the guy to get them all the way back.
And if you want the schedule for a moment, the good news is they start the year week 1 playing Alabama at home. And then after that, a couple of nobody games, East Texas A&M Lions and the Kent State Golden Flashes. Those should both be wins. You play Miami at the beginning of October. You got Clemson in there. You play at Clemson. That's beginning of November. You got Florida at the end of the year. Florida looked a lot better with DJU. Like, they could maybe make a little bit of noise next year. Not DJU, DJ Lagway. Sorry, DJ from the state of Florida, actually good at football. Sorry, I'm so sorry to DJ Lagway. Apologies, DJ Lagway. Your game is so much better than DJU. Sincerest apologies. But no, like they have a couple games on there that could be tricky. You look and you say that they should take care of their business, but we said that about their season last year. So, look, assuming you're taking an L right off the rip to Alabama, you got to get things straight before you play Miami because, oh boy, do you need that win.
Yeah, absolutely right. They've fallen so far behind the other two powers in the state, and arguably UCF is right there nipping at their heels too. Now that UCF is in a power conference, so it's really dire straits for Florida State at this point. I want to talk about NC State because. Man, this is a team that I really have a soft spot for, and I talk myself into being really, really good every single year, and I think I got to back off. I think I got to give them the Texas Tech treatment and just kind of say, okay, listen, we had fun. We thought that you're going to be a real contender, and you just let me down too many times because I know they got dealt a rough hand with how Grayson McCall, that whole situation played out.
Yeah.
He obviously got injured and had to retire from football. We hate to see that.
Yeah.
Hate to see an awesome career like his end that way. But man, it just seems like they've hit a ceiling that they're going to hit. And I just don't see them breaking through. And they didn't really add the reinforcements in the portal this offseason to really make me believe that. And even before the Grayson McCall injury, it was already looking shaky. I can't remember who they were playing week 1. It was on a Thursday or Friday night, and it was an FCS team that they were really struggling with.
I'm looking at it here, pulling it up. It was Western Carolina to start.
Yeah, the good old Catamounts.
Didn't really look that good, and then got blitzed by Tennessee the next week. It just wasn't that good. And the other thing, too, like, it wasn't just that they didn't do a great job in the portal bringing stuff back. They lose Casey Concepcion. Like, he went to A&M, and now that'll be another one of the more dynamic playmakers on their whole team that can make something happen. Maybe not even the whole team, maybe the whole conference. Like, he's now playing for somebody else, and he's going to go make plays for them now. So, like, that's another thing where, NC State, you didn't just lose, like, a guy to graduation, but you lost him to the portal as well. I hate it, but, yeah, I'm kind of sitting here saying I think NC State might be done. Like, I think this might be the end of the line for their kind of run here. Had a couple of really good years. I think it might be over for them. Not the worst schedule this year. Should be able to stack up some wins to start the season. They do play at Duke, and then they do play Virginia Tech, but at Notre Dame in the middle of that schedule, at Pitt, Georgia Tech, Miami, like, those should be some tough games for them to get through. Man, I don't know. They're gonna have to stack some wins early because I think NC State might be on the way out, and I hate it because I love just about everything about that program. I'm with you. I don't know that I can justify it. I'd much rather take Texas Tech right now, and we talked about that on the last pod a little bit with Texas Tech.
Did y'all.
We sure did. Mitch is all in. I'm in, maybe not as all in as Mitch. I'm a fan. I think that they'll play well, but Mitch is sold on Texas Tech, so it's definitely worse treatment for NC State right now than for Texas Tech. I wouldn't put them in the same category of believe in them. I think NC State's probably at the end of the line.
Well, Garrett, we're coming up close to an hour here, so let's end with looking for optimism because all of these teams, Cal, Virginia, Wake Forest, and Stanford, easy for me to say. Cal did make a bowl game, but they lose Fernando Mendoza, and a lot of their offensive production is not coming back this year. Mendoza is off to Indiana in the transfer portal. Virginia, Wake Forest, and Stanford. Virginia was very close to making a bowl. They were in a win-in-your-in situation in the Commonwealth Cup the last week of the season, but Wake Forest and Stanford felt like they had a long way to go by the end of the season. Looking for optimism here. Where are you buying some hopes in? Where are you hoping when it comes to just making a bowl next year? Is there anybody you're a little extra optimistic about from this group?
Not to be the bringer of Ben. I think if I had to pick one, I might like where Virginia is the most.
Virginia's been close a couple times.
They've been close, and I was kind of looking through some schedules while you were talking. Virginia maybe has the most manageable of the schedules this next year. They play Coastal. That's kind of their first game of the year. They play at NC State, which, again, like we talked about them just a second ago, maybe on the downturn, so you can maybe grab one there. William and Mary could be a win. Stanford could be a win. Maybe Florida State doesn't figure it out. We'll see. You do play Louisville, that sucks, but then you get like Washington State as another out of conference, which I think will be manageable as well. No longer the Mateers Privateers, as Mitch likes to call them. He's off to was it Oklahoma? He went on.
Yeah, he's in Oklahoma.
Off to Oklahoma. You play Wake Forest, you play Cal, play Virginia Tech. There's some winnable games on the schedule for Virginia. I think that making the case for Virginia wouldn't be as hard just from like a scheduling standpoint. They'll play a bunch of games at home that are maybe a little bit more favorable for them to win. So you can maybe make the argument that those home games are the ones to really key in on. but not a lot to love here at the bottom of the ACC. Really, I mean, the thing about it too is we're talking about bottom of the ACC. Really, that middle pack of the ACC, there's not a lot to love there either. Again, like the North Carolinas, Pitts, Virginia Techs of the world, I'm not super optimistic on them either. So this is another season where, we've talked about it a couple times. The ACC, you can almost rotate and guess at who's in that middle of the pack, just on a year by year basis. Because one guy will have a quarterback that hits, they'll go ahead and win 9 games. They'll shoot up to the top, kind of like what Duke did this last year. You'll have a team do that this next year that kind of comes out of nowhere. Maybe it's Virginia Tech, maybe it's Pitt, maybe it's Virginia. Who knows? But I don't know that you can maybe accurately predict what's happening at the bottom of the ACC with a lot of confidence, just because of how much sort of parity there is. Lack of extreme competition means you're gonna have a lot of teams in the middle. But yeah, Virginia may be my more optimistic team right now. Just don't really love a lot of that middle to bottom part of the ACC.
Keep an eye on Stanford. I think I did see some optimism worthy things towards the end of the season. I think they had their moments this past year, had a couple near upsets, and I think at least one true upset, right? If I'm remembering correctly, we're a little bit removed now.
So yeah, a little bit further past the season. I'm looking through here. They beat Cal Poly. They did beat Syracuse.
Yeah, that's the
They
game I
beat
was thinking
Syracuse,
of.
yeah, and beat Louisville.
Yeah, those are the two that I was thinking of. So obviously they had some good moments in this season, despite going, what was it, 3-9? Was that the
I
final
think so.
record?
Yeah, those are their 3.
So 2 of the 3 wins were in ACC play,
And good wins.
and really good wins over really good teams at the top of the
Yep.
ACC. So yeah, you're absolutely right though. The bottom half typically of the ACC is typically just a blender, and
Yeah. Well,
it's a lot based on scheduling and a lot based on just who stays healthy, is who's towards the top of that tier.
and not to get too down on Stanford for this year, but schedule really isn't their best friend.
Great.
They do go to BYU, which sucks. They did play better. I mean, they won games that mattered a lot more. So like you could make the case for them there, but they play at BYU. That was a good BYU team this last year. At SMU is on the schedule. At Miami is on the schedule. Notre Dame to finish the year. Not as many easy games in there. Like Boston College is in there. Not the best Boston College team, but that's okay. Florida State's back on the schedule. So, again, maybe Florida State's good. Florida State's probably the biggest asterisk of the ACC right now for me, where I truly don't know. Like, I believe that Florida State should be a championship contending program because they were right there. And you look at the schedule and you look at, what they had. You look at their records, and I did this. I pulled this up. Under Mike Norvell, they went 3-6, 5-7, 10-3, 13-1, 2-10. Like, what happened? I want to believe that there's a 10-win season around the corner for Florida State. You could talk me into 3 wins.
Man, that's just so crazy, and it's gonna be so fascinating to see play out. I can't wait to see where we land on the Seminoles by preview season. Garrett, great time talking with you about a wacky, zany conference. A lot of fun. If you had to put $100 on a team not named Clemson or SMU to win the ACC next year, who would you do?
Pass. No. That sucks. Louisville.
I like it.
You kind of tied me into it a little bit with the Miller Moss coming in and the offense. I think with Louisville there, because I don't really believe in Miami that much. I think Syracuse takes a step backwards. Georgia Tech's close, but I don't think they're quite there. Maybe Louisville.
No love for Bill Belichick's fighting Tar Heels.
No love for Bill Belichick's. No, that's the big one with Bill Belichick. Why the heck did he come back to coaching? Like, how motivated?
We haven't really gotten to talk about that. We need to do that. We need to do that topic.
That's got to be an off season, just one off, like just do it one time type of thing. Because the Super Bowl rings that man brings to the table. I don't understand why on earth you would say, oh, yeah, no, let's get involved with the messy business that is college football right now. I really want to tell 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds that I'm going to pay them $10 million to come play at my college, hoping that they'll be good. Like, why would you want to get involved? You're 72. You've got a very attractive young girlfriend for, I'm sure, completely loving and wholesome reasons. What are you doing, Bill? Just go find your beach, man. I'm telling you this before the season's even. I'm going to give you the same treatment I gave Mac Brown. There's a pink umbrella and a girly cocktail for you on a beach somewhere, and all you got to do is fly there. Like, come on, baby. Let's find somewhere to set it down for a couple years.
Well, on that note, as we expectantly await Bill Belichick's inevitable retirement relatively soon, it's been fun. Do make sure that you are liking and subscribing on YouTube, following along on the podcast app of your choice as well. We're at 3TechPod on Instagram and Twitter, and 3techpod@gmail.com if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, complaints, all the above. We'll send the complaints to Mitch and he can sort through those, but we'll take the compliments on our end. So
we'll take all the credit and none of the blame.
That's how we do it here. That's how we roll at 3Tech HQ. All right, for that man, Mr. Gary Tierney, I'm Trey Reeves. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you guys next time.
Gracious, how about that?